Game prediction video for another one of the bigger games this Saturday, USC at Michigan. So, with coaching in this game, I think USC has an advantage. Lincoln Riley is a very experienced head coach now and a proven winner, while this Sharon Moore at Michigan is experienced with being on the Michigan coaching staff. He's not experienced at all as a head coach. And since he's been a head coach, I've not been very impressed with Michigan at all. So at quarterback, USC has a huge advantage in this game over Michigan. Miller Moss is already, I think, one of the best quarterbacks in college football and already a Heisman contender. He played great against LSU, and then also he played well in their second game against Utah State. And this Davis Warren at Michigan hasn't looked good at all this year. So he looked awful in the game against Texas, and he also looked bad in the opener against Fresno State and against Arkansas State last Saturday. He had a better completion percentage. He completed 11 of 14 of his throws, but he threw three interceptions. And you also have to remember that the competition in that game wasn't the same as it was against Texas or even against Fresno State. And USC has a huge advantage also at wide receiver. Zachariah Branch, I think, is one of the best receivers in the country. I know he's going to be an NFL wide receiver. And their other two starting wide receivers, Kyron Hudson and Jacoby Lane, I thought looked in the LSU game like future NFL wide receivers. USC is loaded at wide receiver to the point where, again, probably not very many of their wide receivers will have very big numbers. And Michigan wide receivers are awful. And the only weapon that Michigan has in the passing offense is that tight end, Colston Loveland. Uh, that's the only advantage that Michigan has over USC offensively, in my opinion. And it's not going to be enough, I don't think. And at running back, both teams are pretty similar. Each team has two good running backs. So Woody Marks from Mississippi State has been doing a good job for USC at running back. He did a pretty good job against LSU, and he did really well against Utah State a couple of weeks ago, rushing for 103 yards and a touchdown on just 13 carries. And then Quentin Joyner, the sophomore talented running back for USC, who hasn't played much college football yet, did really well in the game against Utah State. He didn't get many carries against LSU, but against Utah State, he had 84 rushing yards and two touchdowns on only 10 carries. And for Michigan at running back, Donovan Edwards did do better last Saturday, and they did get their run game going a lot better last Saturday between the two running backs, Donovan Edwards and Mullings. They actually rushed for 235 yards and three touchdowns together. And Edwards had 82 yards, which was the by far the most rushing yards he's had in a game this season. Before that, the two games combined, he had only 68 rushing yards, and he also had a rushing touchdown in that game. And then Mullings has actually looked better than Donovan Edwards has so far this season. He had last Saturday 153 yards rushing and two rushing touchdowns, but you do have to remember that that was Arkansas State. And on the offensive line, neither team has looked very good here this season. So USC's offensive line had a lot of struggles against LSU, and then Michigan's offensive line is obviously taken a big step back from where it was last season. But Michigan's offense wasn't real explosive last year, and it didn't put up a ton of points, but they were able to dominate with their strong line. But their offensive line got destroyed against Texas and hasn't looked great even against not very strong competition. So that's why I think that USC's defensive line, which is taking a big step forward from where it was at last season, will win the battle with the Michigan offensive line. And I do, though, think that Michigan's defensive line will win the battle with the USC offensive line. So Michigan, I think, does have a better defensive line than USC does. Their players are really good. Just the coaching isn't as good as it was before. The defensive line, I think, is the big strength of Michigan's defense this year. The rest of their defense, I think, is taking a big step back. But Mason Graham and Rashawn Benny and Josiah Stewart and Kenneth Grant. Those are four elite players on the defensive line for Michigan, and USC only has one player that's as good as those four players that I just mentioned on their defensive line, Bear Alexander. But they've got other good players too on their defensive line, just not players that are likely going to go first or second or third round in the NFL draft. But at linebacker, USC has taken a huge step forward, while Michigan is not near as good at linebacker, and they're also not near as deep as they were last year. So USC has Eric Gentry at linebacker, who's been doing a really good job for them this season, and then the transfer that they brought in from Oregon State at linebacker has been doing really well too. Arnold is the last name, but Mason Cobb, USC's top linebacker from last season, missed the last game with an injury, but I saw he's expected to play in this game. So that's very good news for USC. And Michigan does have a good linebacker combination with Jay Barham and Ernest Hausman. But other than those two, they're not very good at linebacker. And at the secondary, both teams have had some struggles this season. So for Michigan, except for Will Johnson and McCary Page, they have struggled some in the secondary this year. Those new players that are starters haven't seemed to be as good as their old starters were from last season. Their secondary struggled against Texas and even against Fresno State. They gave up 250 something yards passing. So that I think is going to be a problem going against this really good passing attack that USC has. And then USC's secondary, it has talent, and Michigan's got a lot of talent in their secondary too. But USC hasn't really shown it a lot on the field yet. They really struggled in the secondary against LSU. But good news for USC is Michigan's passing offense is so bad that they won't be able to take advantage of a possibly weaker secondary for USC than average. But good news for USC is their best defensive back, cornerback Jalen Smith, is expected to play in this game after missing the last game with an injury. And Michigan is going to have to keep the ball away from Zachariah Branch when they're doing kicks and punts, or they're probably going to lose because he's the fastest player probably in college football. It's amazing to watch him run and see all the speed that he has. But I think that Michigan's defense will be good enough to slow down the USC offense some in this game. But with USC's defense being a lot improved and Michigan's offense being so garbage, I don't think Michigan will be able to score much at all in this game. And I think the passing offense for USC it makes the difference, and they get the win. So I've got USC 27, Michigan 13. That will be it with this video, and please subscribe and thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.